Hi, kitty cats. The perennial argument these days is tradition versus innovation. It's baby boomers versus millennials. It's the good old days versus kids these days. Is this tension manufactured just to keep the people in power comfortable? Or is tradition a threat to innovation that ensures future generations are going to have it worse than their ancestors? So today, let's talk about four very disparate conversations I had that have a common thread of holding to what we know versus breaking the chains of tyranny. So here are my opening plugs. First of all, I am Dr. Amethysta Herrick. I am both a scientist and a content creator. I discuss identity and gender, and you can see here we're going to talk about society using the scientific method. You can actually find plenty of information about me and the work that I do if you go to the website right below, which is purplepawclan.com. You'll be able to find a page there that has all the social media networks that I'm on. You can read all the articles that I write. You can listen to or watch the podcasts that I record with very interesting people, and they really are interesting people. And finally, you can also check out the hypnotherapy work that I do to help people work through some of these issues with identity and gender. So if you would like to support my work, and hopefully you do, you can get a subscription at the website, again, purplepawclan.com, for as little as $5 a month. And you might just even sign up there for my free newsletter that publishes about every 2 weeks. It's Dark Moon and Full Moon. I actually missed yesterday, so believe me, everybody, you're getting a newsletter later tonight. And you can follow me on social media, like and share the things I do. That's beautiful support as well, and I thank you for any of those that you do. Finally, I also like to publish other people's work on this website. If you'd like to contribute your original work, please, in identity or gender, you can email me. There's a contact page at that website, which once again, purplepawclan.com. Oh, that's a whole lot of stuff to go through. Let me talk about or say hello to the people I see here already. I see Emma, hello. I see Priscilla, hello. I also see Charlotte and Angela. So that's good. Interesting. I think we're missing like Margie and Genevieve. Generally they're there. But this may be a boring topic. But it's not going to be a boring topic. I actually had 4 conversations. These are really disparate. 4 conversations. One about ladies' hat shops, like you do. One about women's esoteric orders. Oh, Margie is here. Hi, Margie. One about women's esoteric orders. One about Renaissance magic, right? The veritable key of Solomon. And then finally, a comment thread that I had on a video, the transgender content, particularly the points that I make, obscures the work done by gay men decades ago. Believe it or not, I found a common thread in these. This is what I do with my life, really. The question, the common thread is, when is breaking with tradition better than sticking to it? Could there be a reason why we have traditions in the first place? And specifically, do those traditions always serve us? Especially today, when you can look at religion or politics. Like, there's good reasons to ask these questions. And there's also likely a compromise that's always necessary. We do have to be aware of where we came from, because not being aware prevents us from avoiding the early mistakes that we made, before. But we also always need to be aware of where we can improve. Typically, that comes from friction between the tradition and how society has changed, that where we came from actually no longer describes the way things are today. So today here, we'll investigate so the ladies' hat shop, readily available education and gender expression, no kidding, overcoming patriarchy to make spirituality inclusive, and actually overcoming that same patriarchy and making society more inclusive as well. And finally, we can get back to a super lesbian animal RPG, because we rescued Jody, or vice versa, because she kind of jumped in and turned off the robot. So I don't know if we rescued her, and now we're in this town of undead, mummies and machines. So anyway, we'll get back to that. Here we go. Margie, I'm sorry, I didn't know that you were here. So what does Margie say? I like this. I like this comment. Margie's already thinking about this in the New Zealand context. I'm gonna need to find a. Where's my tissue? I need to wipe my nose because you probably would prefer that over, something else. All right. So Margie was thinking about this in the New Zealand context, while New Zealand was the first Western country to have women's suffrage, which was in 1893. Interesting. They only legalized homosexuality in 1986. So it is kind of a weird thing, Oh, here we go. This is a beautiful tradition or sedition. That is the question. I wish I could spin that into that soliloquy from Hamlet, but I'm sorry, I'm not that good. All right, I'm going to let's talk about millineries and gender expression. This conversation was one I had with my friend Bill. Usually, I've known Bill for a long time. I've known Bill for 15 years anyway, so good long time. 15 years, yeah. 17, really, but it's not that important. I've known him a long time, and he mentioned millineries to me. He asked me, have you ever heard what these are? Now, I was unfamiliar with the term. Today, if you look for a millinery, what that means is somebody who makes ladies' hats and ladies' accessories. But it used to mean something slightly different, although there are still aspects of the older meaning in where you can go today, in a millinery today. In the 15th century, yeah, I'm going to go back 500 years. In the 15th century, a milliner was a vendor of fancy wares. Sounds pretty fancy already. There's a guess that it might have been related. This is what Bill told me, that it might have been related to the Latin root mill, right? So in Latin, right, that was 1,000. So you would go to this shop because there were 1,000 different ways that you can learn to express yourself. When you look at etymology online, which I actually highly recommend, it's so fun to know the etymology of words. Maybe it's just me, but it's also guessed that maybe this could be related to the city of Milan, which at the time, at the very least, when you're in, hanging out in the mud, I suppose, in London, seems like a place of very high fashion for the people who are far away from it. Now, what is the purpose of a millinery? Actually, here's a deep philosophical musing. Is there military millinery? You would have to guess there must be military milliners, because there are women in the military, and they need hats. I mean, I think we've answered the question. That was very deep, though. I do appreciate it. So, is the purpose of a millinery? Anecdotally, and this is what Bill was telling me again, this is where you could learn how a gentleman or a lady acted in society. Now, Bill gave me a pretty good example, which was actually taking snuff. So I don't know who's doing that these days, but once again, remember, I went back 500 years. Taking snuff. There are social norms around who and how was able to take snuff. If you, gentlemen would take snuff, and by the way, snuff, in case you don't know, that was very highly powdered tobacco. It wasn't something you smoked. Typically, you sniffed it up your nose. Now, there were ways apparently to do this that were gentlemanly, and then ways to do this that were feminine, that a lady would do. I got to tell you, I think about snuff and I go, I can't imagine there's really any way to do that that's going to be fashionable. That's me. Anyway, the point was that learning how to fulfill these norms was important. If you didn't fulfill these social norms, you might be looked down upon. Now, more recently, meaning not necessarily the 15th century, but more recently, this is also how women, right, because we're talking about ladies' accessories as well, and probably like pubescent girls, learned how to express their own fashion. Now, of course, this is fashion that's still going to be in line with social norms, right? This is the purpose of going to a millinery. You can learn how to express these social norms. And I want you to think for a moment. If you're transgender, okay, just think for a moment. Imagine a place, one place that you could go to where they could tell you something like what makeup was going to work best for your face, what colors are going to work best for you, what clothes were going to work best for your body, how to express yourself, if you're assuming, how to express yourself according to your gender. I was talking about makeup, of course, if you were expressing yourself in a feminine way. But imagine if there were one place you could go to where they'd teach you essentially how to express yourself according to your gender. Can you imagine how much pain that would cut down on? You would be learning about social norms purposely. And learning about social norms purposely means that we would reduce the amount of gender dysphoria we feel. Because if we learn already accepted social norms and then we express those, we're already fulfilling social norms and we're not going to be rejected by the social environment. Like, that sounds beautiful to me, the idea that there would be somebody who would help you do this. And it's not like a finishing school. It's not, like a hazing ritual in a fraternity or a fraternal society. It's just a place you could go and you pay somebody. What should I do? Like, how should I express myself? Now, unfortunately, we don't appear to have these any longer. There are millineries where you can go and get, like, a little pillbox hat, which, for what it's worth, I really would love to get one of these days. It was a little pillbox hat that would be sitting, somewhat askance on my head. And I would have to think of it like that. Look at my hat. It is askance. And here you go. See, Margie even says, I'd love to go to a place that can make me a stylish femme hat that fits her giant melon of a head. There you go. See? So you can still go to these places, but for the most part, we don't have a place where you can go to get education in gender expression, and I cannot imagine just how valuable that would be to those of us who need it. And by the way, that's pretty much everybody. Like, everybody needs to know what social norms there are in order to determine which ones you're going to fulfill, right? So I think that's an example of tradition, ultimately tradition, social norms, turned into education. And education sounds pretty good, but it could also certainly go wrong. Imagine if the milliner you went to, doesn't want social norms to change. I'm trying to think about how I want to say this without being really nasty. Like, what if you have somebody who goes, no, I'm not going to allow you to express yourself in ways that would change social norms. Instead, they might inflict the norms that they want on every customer. You're not going to get to express who you are. You're going to express who the milliner wants us to be. Now, that, of course, is pretty much how we learn how to be, how to express our gender, is by trying to, first of all, to be who somebody else wants us to be. And then somewhere down the road, we go, God, I really don't like that way that somebody wanted me to be. And then if you're transgender, you go along and along and along, and then it hurts so badly that you change because of that. But worse than what it does individually to a person, say, even a cisgender person, if you have somebody who's going to express, or who's going to teach you this is what you get to express, that means the social environment can't evolve. You have social norms that may no longer serve, and they might be preserved just because. Just because that's what the milliner likes. Just because. I'm thinking about, there are a lot of people who, they'll see a fashion show and they'll be like, what's like a dress made out of meat? Like, what the hell's going on here? That's part of the purpose of fashion shows, is to go, look, these are the types of things that we could do in fashion. Should we choose to do it? Your mission, should you choose to accept it, apparently is to wear a dress made out of meat. I mean, that wasn't really the point of it, although it's kind of where it ended up, right? So anyway, social norms that no longer serve. There's a reason why there's value in challenging those. And of course, there are examples of people changing just because. Just as you have people who will hold on to tradition just because. There are people who change just because. And now we can turn to magical traditions. I'm telling you, this is going to throw you violently from subject to subject, and hopefully that's fun. Let me see what we do here. Well, here we go. So Charlotte says, when I did my milliner's course back in the 90s, we only did hats. Didn't realize it was broader across wears. Yeah, apparently, some of this had to do with accessories like brooches and ribbons and give me other accessories here. But things like that, jewelry, presumably makeup. When you go back far enough. So they seemed, and again, I didn't do extensive research on this. I'm not like Anita with a linguistics doctorate, like of a milliner's doctorate. But my understanding is, yeah, they had all kinds of things so that you could basically go, well, do I like ribbons? Do I like this? Whatever. And you try it on, you look in the mirror and you go, yeah, I'll take it. That kind of a thing. So is fascinating how this is broader than I had ever known. And actually, I didn't know the word, which is what I said. So, what it is. Here you go. Margie's wearing a straw cowboy hat. Yeah, see, maybe you need the pillbox hat. The two of us, we can wear, the pillbox hat. Here you go. Thank you, Priscilla. Here's more. Fake flowers, whatever you wear. The little brooch, you have the brooch that has, there's always, like, somebody has, like, a big, I don't know, cowboy or something. I'm trying to figure out what you put on it, but, I like, where did this go? Here we go. So Angela also mentioned she first expressed her true gender by her gestures, which were feminine even pre-transition, to even pre-gender transition. And I'll tell you, I was the same. I was always very gesticulatory. If that's not a word, I'll make it a word now. But I always used a lot of gestures. And I had people who would go, yeah, well, like, what are you doing? Like, use a few less gestures. First of all, you're too close to me. I'm getting hit in the head. Don't do that. So I think that's a great example, actually, that some of the things that maybe some of the gestures that you use were looked down upon. I mean, certainly for me. And as a result, I think, like, maybe if I'd gone to somebody who could have said, oh, yeah, well, that's more feminine. Because I even think about it this way. If I went to a millinery and they said, what are the things you like? And I said this, they would go, oh, you are transgender. Like, if I could have known that at 8, I mean, I did. But if they had gone, well, listen, this is kind of important. Like, maybe they could have talked to my parents and said, you can save this person a whole lot of pain. If you just lean into, this is how they're going to express themselves. I think that's important, personally. Here we go. So as long as we're going to talk about fashion, there is value in tradition throwbacks. Yes, at New Year's Eve, Margie says she went out in a fancy sequined little black dress that was much more formal than the unwashed masses. This is why, you stand out from the unwashed masses. At the very least, you are washed. And that's good. This is one of the things I actually admire about you, Margie, is that you're willing to go, listen, I'm going to do what I want to do. And as she said, she got some great compliments from it. So there you go. Now I want to talk about witches, women, and magical currents. I swear there's a purpose to all of this. So I had a conversation with my friend Bryn, and maybe some of you know Bryn. Bryn is in the Purple Pod Discord server. Super, super, super smart guy, first of all. Just an amazingly smart guy. He sent me a blessing on Discord, like a blessing for the new year. And I'm not going to read it. I mean, it was very lovely. But I went, what? Because it had stuff about, the left hand, the right hand, light and dark. And it was really beautiful. And I said, wow, did you make that up? And he says, oh, yeah, I did. But obviously highly influenced by Western magical tradition, which makes sense, right? Because much of what we know about today, anyway, about pagan traditions, magical traditions, comes from really not that far back, when it comes down to it. I had mentioned 500 years was a good long time before we got to millenaries. Our understanding of pagan and magical traditions comes from like Renaissance magicians, typically books written during the Renaissance, and then also people who chose to like reclaim. I don't know that I want to use the word reuse, but reclaim traditions. And you can see this, assuming you're in Wales, you can see this in the bardic tradition in Wales. Every year they now have something called a bardas, where people compete to be the best bard in the land. So this is an example of reclaiming traditions that come from far back. We don't really strictly know, for what it's worth, if what Iolo Morgannwg was talking about when he started putting together the first bardas, if like that really does go back, 2 billion years, or if it was at least in part his invention. The point is that reclaiming, like having some of these traditions, is not necessarily bad. When you look in history, especially when you look in magical traditions, using symbols that have long histories tends to work. Now, just as I'm not going to call it a quick aside. Right. Just as an aside, if you've ever seen a Nazi flag that had something called a swastika on it, the swastika is actually a very old symbol. Interestingly, it is an Indian symbol, like subcontinent of India type of symbol. It goes back a long time. There was a reason why that regime wanted to use a symbol that had, those kinds of meanings to it. This is a solar system, by the way. So a solar, very, very, having to do with big masculine energy. Maybe that's starting to make some sense there. The point is, when you have a system with long histories, they tend to work for what you're trying to do with them. There are symbols in the human psyche that go back literally tens of thousands of years. And we know these things. We've found some symbols. We found some drawings that have common symbols. And this is globally. It's not like you had somebody who was in, I'm trying to remember the cave. There's a cave in France. I'm forgetting it. Anyway, the point is a cave in France, but we see symbols that go, halfway across the world, and we go, wow, that's interesting. These are common symbols because humans had a very common experience tens of thousands of years ago. So the point is, if you can capture those, you might be able to tap into some very powerful symbols. Now, I want to grab a couple of comments here. Yes, so here we go. So Priscilla brings up some transitions were pre-science based. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about, so she means not eating pork in some cultures. Pork went bad quicker and had more parasites. I think what you're referring to is Leviticus. There's I don't know the chapter and verse, but having to do with eating meat of the cloven hoof. That actually would have ruled out deer. I don't know, and everything else with a cloven hoof. You tell me. I'm not going to do all your work for you. But great point, Priscilla. Some of these traditions were before we knew how to refrigerate things, or before we could refrigerate things, which is kind of important, And we're going to get back to that. Good, excellent point. Thank you for bringing up a religious law. I don't know what to call that, guideline. Before I get there. What else do we have? Yes, Margie, it is literally the Wild Welsh Battle of the Bards. No, I mean, at one point I sent somebody an email. It was Christopher Hughes. I'll go ahead and drop the name. Sent Christopher Hughes an email, and he goes, well, okay, look, I'd love to talk about this, but I'm going to be gone for the month of whatever it is, February. No, it's in the summer, so August or something. He goes, I'd love to talk about this, but I can't, because I'm going to be at the Bardas for the month of August. And I was like, wow, cool. So, yeah, Vikings, there you go. Loving Vikings. Oh, hey, Genevieve. Genevieve is here. All right, here we go. This was the other, is this what it was called? So that cave, Lascaux? I don't know how to pronounce that, but thank you for that. So Margie brings up, so here's a little bit about the swastika. So possibly cosmic in origin. Yes, spinning, okay, so four-tailed comet. This shape, so you're saying, yeah, the shape appeared simultaneously across the world 4,000 years ago. I can certainly see that. We have definitely seen, we have definitely seen, astronomical events show up as symbols. So it's fascinating to think. That is, it is a big solar symbol, specifically in Indian philosophy, Indian religious philosophy. Here we go. Okay, let me move on just a little bit here. When we think about, and so I said, there's value in looking at these traditions. You can tap into symbols that have a tremendous amount of power. But Renaissance magicians, early pagan reclaimers, were not very diverse. I'll just say it. They're like white Christian men, white European, typically Christian men. Again, not necessarily bad, but it certainly did mean that women might feel excluded from them. Historically, you don't see women treated as magicians. Men were magicians. Women were given roles of seeresses. That's kind of fun. That's a whole lot of sibilants. Women were given the roles of like oracles. They were shamans. They did folk magic, healing magic. But instead, you had, in the Renaissance at the very least, men doing the important magic. They were working with powers women couldn't understand. And you can actually go way back here. If you look at Jewish tradition, right, rabbis were men. In the Catholic tradition, priests were only men. There's a lot of political reasoning behind that, but at least in part, it's because men did the important rituals. So this led to women making their own traditions. One of my favorite was developed by Jenna Tellendrew. That's an excellent example. That one's quite a bit more recent. The first book was released in the 1990s, but I'm talking about a women's magical order called Sisterhood of Avalon. It turns out I'm a member of this. This is partly why I'm not really plugging it, but I'm a member of the Sisterhood of Avalon. This is a completely new formulation. Let's see, completely new, I would say, system using some older symbols. Two big ones are the sun and the moon. Let's say the moon and the sun. Using the wheel of the year, or at least how the year changes and how life is cyclic, the cyclicity of so much of what we do, the cyclicity of the solar cycle, with the cyclicity of the lunar cycle superimposed on top of it, and then also uses Welsh deities, some of which go back, easily. It's almost 2,000 years, easily, at least when we're thinking about like some written references to them. So this is a beautiful example of a woman breaking from tradition, but breaking from existing tradition can also be dangerous. If you do not use some of the symbols that made the tradition work, you might be cutting yourself off from very powerful magical currents. Let's just say it like that. So it may be more difficult, ultimately, to do the work that you wanted to do in the first place. So now you have women. So if they're breaking from a tradition, now you have women trying to assert their power. They're trying to break from, ultimately, let's call it ancient misogyny, but possibly not being able to because they don't have access to some of the power of these symbols. And so if you look at some more recent magical traditions, let's say like Wicca, Gerald Gardner developing some of this in the mid 20th century, maybe the 1940s into the 1950s, some more recent, and Druidry for that matter, which takes some inspiration from the Welsh traditions, the Welsh reclamations. Wow. The Barthas. But then again, some of these are relatively recent magical traditions. And you'll notice they will stick to cis-het symbols, just like a lot of Western magical tradition does, because that's what was developed by white Christian European men back in the Renaissance. So, now you might ask the question, So I'm ready to move on to my next conversation. Well, you might ask the question, what about folk magic? How about folk magic? Like, isn't there good in having less structured traditions? Like, wouldn't a less structured tradition, especially if you broke from some of the magical currents that were masculine, wouldn't that evolve more easily? And I think for that, we're going to move on to my third conversation, which had to do with the Solomonic Pentacles. I swear I'm going to come to a point. Swear. Let me look at these. Let me see. I love this. Priscilla says no difference between magic chants and prayers. They are essentially the same thing. I mean, you can look at so much of Christian, like the Mass. This is a ritual that is designed to bring about the transubstantiation, right? To make this bread and wine turn into, not figuratively but literally, the blood and flesh of Jesus. So, that's a magical act right there. I don't care who you are. If that's one magical frickin' act there. So, Priscilla, thank you. I mean, true. The restrictions on pork, originally Jews, certainly. But good point. Yeah, it's not that that's, it's not that it was just for Jews. Good point. Here you go. So here we go. This is another interesting point. In Asia, the swastikas, you can see in furniture, but it depends upon the direction that you see the thing turning. I don't know. So I don't know if it was. She says she's not sure if it's Asia or South America, but it might mean, there might be a solar symbol. It might be a lunar symbol, is what Priscilla is saying. I'm going to tell you, I sort of forget. I want to say that the specifically Indian swastika goes counterclockwise, because I want to say that the symbol used by Nazi Germany goes clockwise. I may be wrong, so I think perhaps he did some flipping as well. So anyway, there's a lot of history there. Point is, it's a symbol that has a very long history. Here we go. Oh, I love this. Margie says the sacred nature of the swastika was explored in depth by an artist I once met known as Man Woman, who'd really fit into this crowd. I believe that. And thank you, Angela. Such a great point. Christian holidays are absolutely based on pagan holidays, so it was more acceptable to most people. Yeah, the Christians ended up learning. I mean, Christianity and, of course, the Roman Empire ended up sort of merging, later on. What are we talking? 5th century or so CE. But the Romans were excellent at something called syncretism. 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 Thank you. I'm in a spelling bee. Syncretism meant that you could go into an area and conquer the people, but not necessarily by force. You could kind of go in and you go, well, so what are your traditions around here? And they go, well, these are our traditions. And you could go, oh my gosh, same with us. We totally do the same thing. We are totally the same. We may as well just move in with you and do all these things. Thank you. So Margie brings up, syncretism or cultural hoovering. So this was a way of actually getting in with people so that they didn't really see that you were giving them this big hug while you were holding that, that shiv that's about to go into the back there, as they end up stealing your land and your riches and your daughters. And anyway, Romans were great at this, really super skilled at this. All right. I had talked about let me go back to those notes. The hell was I saying? Oh, yeah. So folk magic versus structured traditions. So now what I want to talk about is something called the Solomonic Pentacles, especially as how those are thought about today. This was another conversation I had with somebody I've two people. One named Sophia, and I believe I've mentioned Sophia, a good friend of mine who also has helped me a lot in doing content strategies, etc. But also with somebody I met through an acquaintance. Before I move on too much more, let me do my FCC mandated station identification. I'm Dr. Amethysta Herrick. I am a scientist who talks about identity and gender. And today we're talking about how how tradition, the traditions in society can be both liberating as well as restricting. So I had mentioned Renaissance magicians, right? Renaissance magicians here. One of those Renaissance pieces of Renaissance magic is called the Veritable Key, the Veritable Key of Solomon. This was a grimoire, which is to say it was a working piece of magical tradition. But there's a, what's the term for it? Pseudo-epigraphic? I think that's the word. Where's Anita? She would tell me, right? It's attributed to King Solomon, biblical King Solomon, but not at all believed, upon investigation to be really having been developed by King Solomon. It's an interesting thought. Why would you attribute it to Solomon, to King Solomon? You establish an existing magical current, right? I mean, you're actually tapping into a tradition. You're like, we're going to use something that already must have been pretty dang good, because like it ended up in the Bible. That's got to be pretty dang good, right? So you attribute it to Solomon because that's an actual symbol that you're tapping into. It's very unlikely that Solomon ever did any of this work, but that's not really the point. The point is the ability to tap into symbols that mean something to humanity. So like I said, this is a grimoire. I just love saying that word, grimoire. I don't know why, because you can give it a little bit of like a vocal fry at the end, grimoire. I'm finished. Sorry. So the Veritable Key of Solomon comes from the Renaissance, and it seems that the added to the Veritable Key are these Solomonic pentacles. Now, according to this contact I have, it doesn't appear that the pentacles are actually part of the history of the development of the Veritable Key. She also said that it's probably likely that these were along the lines of folk magic, which would mean that they were probably used by women, not by men, because these pentacles have been used historically like talismans. And a talisman, in case you're unaware of what the word means, a talisman is something like you can wear them, you can make art with them. It's something that you use, something that you can use without actually taking too much of your own effort. And that's because they tend to incorporate very powerful symbols. And these powerful symbols are the way you can tap into the magical current. You don't really need engagement more than seeing them, handling them, having them sort of in your head. That's how a talisman works. So my friend, hopefully she's my friend. We're really acquaintances at this point. Well, we kind of bonded on Friday, so I'll call her a friend. She says if you take those pentacles in context of this Veritable Key of Solomon, they get a certain systematic sense to them. So you can see that there's a system behind them in terms of the symbols that they use and why they use these symbols, how they're put together and why they mean what they mean. But by doing that, by installing it as part of a greater system, she believes that means they lose some of their talismanic power. Because you now have a defined structure that says what these are supposed to do. They're part of a greater system. That formality sort of means that they lose a folk magic capability. Now now I'm going to go into an opinion here, but actually let me pull this up. Priscilla brings up an amazing point. Angel people don't like knowing that bunnies and eggs have nothing to do with Jesus since he lacks ovaries. It's true, but of course the goddess from whom the word Easter comes, Ostara, certainly the goddess of fertility, had plenty of things having to do with eggs and of course animals that reproduced quickly. So bunnies. There's a Susie Izzard bit I'm trying to remember, but she makes some point about, she says the wood of the cross, the brown of the chocolate, and then people laugh, right? And she goes, "Well, you tell me." Right? Because obviously there's no obvious connection there. There's no, but the symbol of an avatar, of a god made flesh that dies and is reincarnated, or in some way has a cyclic bit, that has a whole lot of power. That isn't. Oh, hi, Emily. Oh, sorry. Yes, Emily. Sorry, I want to make sure I said that correctly, and hopefully I did. That has a whole lot of power. There's an Egyptian story, the Egyptian story of Horus, that is pretty much that whole story. So, to return to the Solomonic pentacles, having those pentacles, and I'm saying these have some talismanic power to them, and they were later sort of incorporated, it appears, into the veritable key. Having them as folk magic makes a lot of sense to me. There is value in tapping into symbols without a huge structure. And here's why. Margie's gonna love this too. There's a lot of value in accessibility. Right? When you have people who feel disenfranchised, who feel they do not have power, when they feel marginalized, when they feel powerless, accessibility to anything that might help somebody feel powerful is very, very important. We've even talked a little bit about this, how this sense of powerless is actually self-propelling. It's self-fulfilling. That stigma actually fuels lack of performance, poorer performance. So this is very important. Having symbols that you can tap into without having to have this big mother structure on it, it's very important, and is a break from tradition. So it's a good question. Is that innovation of the Solomonic Pentacles, is it worth losing the structure of the veritable key of Solomon? This is somewhat akin to asking the question, should normal people, let's put that in quotation marks, right? Should normal people be able to use this system without knowing how it works? Are talismans in some way fake? Because you don't know what the background is. This leads, no joke, into my final conversation that actually has to do with the Alphabet Mafia. Again, I'm going to have to use finger quotes again. The Alphabet Mafia. I got a really critical comment from somebody last week having to do with a live stream I did where he said that I muddied the waters of the queer community. So let me check. T.S. Paris is here. Hello, Paris. Let me check comments really fast. So here we go. Oh, yeah, thank you. See, Margie, I figured that was going to resonate. The idea of granting making power accessible, whatever it might be, is amazing. Oh, here we go, Celius. And then Priscilla says it in another way. When you have a symbol with a quick is equal to a quick mass information drop. Yes, makes it so much easier to get things done. This is part of the power of a talisman. But I mean, you see this in all these other things. Why do we have a rainbow flag? It's a symbol. And we can all rally around this, right? That's one big reason why the rainbow flag has power. It's because it's something that now goes back 60 years. No, not quite, but 50 some odd years. As early 1970s, I think it was developed. Of course, I'm forgetting the person's name, and I apologize there. But anyway, there you go. That's a part of the power of it. Now we can tap into something that's been around for 60 years that has been used as a rallying point. So, all right, the final conversation. Margie, I'm going to get to your comment in a sec. I have actually talked about this before. I have gotten several comments. I've been streaming, making videos now for, gosh, just almost 2 years. Well, yeah, right around 2 years here. A little bit more, but I mean, like, seriously, for almost 2 years here. I get these comments. They're usually from older gay men. and usually British, although this person was from the United States. So I mean, I guess, maybe older gay men are an equal opportunity, you know, trying to keep me from being part of this current. But so usually these comments, I'm trying to figure out how to say that without just like saying the rest of my point. Let me say the rest of my point. Anyway, usually older gay men, they say that I'm muddying the water in some way. I'm making things worse with what I talk about. And in particular, and this comment sort of made this point, that I'm messing up the work that they did like back in the day. It's always back in the day, I think I've seen that a bunch. The work that I did back in the day for gay rights. Now this one comment actually called out what he called the Alphabet Mafia. Once again, stick that in quotes. He equated the work that I do with forcing people to use a long acronym, whatever. He made a joke about, it was like, for what it's worth, the joke was TQIA plus 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 plus. And if that didn't bring it home, I'll just spell it out. That was LGB without the TQIA plus. But he says that, so he's equating the work that I do with forcing people to use this long acronym. Now I won't debate, and I have actually spoken about this on other occasions. There are people who see part of what happens here as language, because language is part of society, right? I mean, like, that's not a big surprise here. But even using that phrase, the way he used that phrase, it was intended to be pejorative. He was trying to say that the work I did was lesser in some way because I was not in the LGB, which ironically I am, but that's, not supposed to be the point. He had a reference to gay rights. And here's where I'm going to get a little bit maybe crabby. Ooh, hang on, let me do Margie's comment. There we go. The Alphabet Mafioso. It's, hey, you got a nice vowel there. It'd be a real shame if something nasty happened to it. Right. I'd hate for your vowel suddenly to become a consonant. Oops. Did I mess that up? Here we go. Angela, so here we go. This is here's another great point here too. So Angela says that the symbol that she uses to help with her emotions due to the loss of her partner is a teddy bear. Yeah, that she shares emotional sadness with every 3 months on holiday. See, these things have power. And this is something, it was an emotional connection to her partner that can now be symbolized by this one teddy bear. And I think that's beautiful. And as long as we're talking about flags, oh my goodness, I still missed it. Charlotte says she needs to find a flag maker that can place the transgender flag in where the Union Jack goes on the Australian flag. I think that's kind of a cool idea. I like that a lot. Well, wait a minute, Australia. I thought you were in New Zealand. Maybe I'm wrong. All right, here we go. The reference to gay rights. Now, here's why maybe I'm going to get a little caustic. The way I read that, when a gay man says, you're messing up the work I did with gay rights, it says to me, he'd gotten what he needed. He even says it. He says he's been married to his partner openly in a place in like Illinois, I think it was. He'd been out as gay for 50 years. And in some way, by advocating for my own rights, I take them away from him. That there's a tradition, and I really am going to use quotation fingers here. There is a tradition of the Marriage Equality Act being attacked. And, it's not only just being attacked, but being attacked by someone who was not entirely covered by that work from before. And I actually kind of believe some of this outrage, this is a guess, comes from the idea that older gay men have, that they go, well, the work is finished. Or it seems like, that the commenter, if the commenter has some outrage, that they go, well, I wouldn't leave work unfinished. This is an attack on, this is the work I did decades ago. You're attacking the work I did decades ago. It can't possibly be unfinished. But is any work ever finished? I mean, laws? Society changes. It's changed since 2015 when the Marriage Equality Act was passed. It's changed since 2025. There is never an end to fighting for people who are marginalized. You know why? Because there's always new people being marginalized. You know, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago where you have stigma. That stigma, in fact, actually, that was the live stream upon which this person commented. There is always going to be some way of stigma because it benefits the people, it benefits certain people. And so they shoot for having people marginalized. Marginalizing people helps lower their rate of performance, lower their rate of improvement, and so therefore the people in power can continue to improve more quickly. Now the tradition here, as I see it, is to assume that laws never need to be updated. And Priscilla, we're finally coming back to your point. Laws never need to be updated. That's the tradition. Or at least that's a conservative take on this. It doesn't matter if these laws are in the Constitution, the way the Bill of Rights was written, why is there a comma there or not a comma there? It doesn't matter if it's the Constitution, it doesn't matter if it's the Magna Carta, it doesn't matter if it's Leviticus, because there's a lot of people who think this. Once the laws are written, there's just no reason to revisit them. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? So what is the payoff here? I'm going to get to these comments in a sec. What is the payoff here? Now, certainly there is value in tradition, but innovation must never be given up. And it turns out this is, this is not me making all that important of an observation, but it turns out it's not either or. It's both and. So let me look at these comments really fast. So this is, yes. So first of all, I do want to point out, so Priscilla does say that language is a living organism. It's got to be. I mean, we're always making new words, right? Words change. I talked earlier in this live stream. I think I'm looking at somebody named Calic. I'm a little unsure, but it's done in emojis, so it's kind of fun. So hi. I talked earlier in this program about how the purpose of a word, the purpose of a millinery changed. What a milliner does changed. Yes, language is living. Of course it is. So here we go. Margie says messing up the work, this whole idea of messing up the work that was done on gay rights decades ago, is precisely analogous to the way closed-minded radical feminists, here we go, I'm going to say probably trans-exclusionary radical feminists, denied Margie in particular protection or community as an intimate partner violence survivor of the wrong gender identity. Yeah. I mean, it's analogous to that. And I would say, you throw TERFs out there, the point of being TERFy is to say, look, we have these, ultimately it comes down to, as I've mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, bioessentialism, right, that we learned in the 1960s, XXXY, no change, and then learned in the 1980s, no, not XXXY, but they go, just don't, that's not true, that's not true. We have something that's, way old, and therefore tradition, and therefore true. I'm actually going to get to that point, but there you go. I love this, first of all. Priscilla says, isn't messing up the work what happens every time we protest and ask for rights? Of course. Of course. The idea of going, look, I got what I needed, and screw all y'all, as it were. I mean, I think that's kind of jerky. Of course we do this. This is why we continue to have people who govern, because things change. They change. Ooh, this is great. The door of liberation was not supposed to be slammed shut. Yes. Oh, I love that. Please close chat and like stream, then open chat and party again. Thank you. Here we go. I'll pop that up. Thank you. Let's get some likes on that. So here we go. So Angela says in the UK they had trans rights now, with a legal ruling in April 2025. Oh, sorry, I misread how this I would have. I wanted a comma. In the UK, they had transgender rights. Now, with a legal ruling in April 2025, we have lost our right to a change of sex from male to female. I got to tell you, I'm reading a ton of stuff about things like Peggy versus Fife. Of course, that particular Supreme Court decision that you bring up, Angela, about the Supreme Court ruling on the Equality Act of 2010. I'm reading a lot about this because it's interesting to see. I'll see if I can find this. Oh, Angela, you're not in the Discord server, but let me see if I can, some way I can get this to you. But there was a really good article I read recently, and hopefully I saved it, about why employment tribunals are never going to end up like truly upholding. I don't know how to put that. Like they're never going to rule that same-sex, this somewhat nebulous phrase of same-sex spaces, they're never going to rule that that's going to be possible. Because you can't. Like, I mean, Peggy versus NHS Fife this is like a hospital. And it's like, well, at some point you have to get the job done. Like, just get the job done. Understand you may not like this particular aspect of the job, but you're being paid. So suck it up and get the job done. So that was one part of the article that I read. So if I can get it to you somewhere, join the Discord server. Just All right, here we go. I had said this is not either or. It has to be both and. Is that we don't really look at tradition versus innovation. This is a false dichotomy. It's always been a false dichotomy. Why would you want to set this up as a false dichotomy? Because if you set it up as this false dichotomy, you can split people. You can make sure that innovation doesn't happen. This false dichotomy says essentially that the tradition that we've held forever is necessarily disposed by innovation. That all of those beliefs that we held so dear and the people who hold them dear are worthless. There's a baby boomer out there right now going, yeah, that's true. You're calling me worthless. But that is not the spirit of innovation, or at the very least, it certainly shouldn't be. There is no doubt we have to remember where we came from. I wish I could remember, who made the quote, or who had the quote, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. If nothing else, there are bad things in our history. We never want to lose the lessons that we learned from history, because we don't want to have to make those same mistakes again. Those mistakes are always costly, not even necessarily financially, which some people would care more, but certainly in terms of loss of life. Marginalization. We don't want to lose these lessons from history. We don't want to make these same mistakes again. And at the same time, and here we go, to harken back. I suddenly turned into like Paul Revere. To go back to what Priscilla mentioned too, at the same time, we need to apply those lessons to today. Lessons are always contextual. You don't have contextual you don't have laws that don't apply to a social environment. Lessons are contextual. There's no such thing as like a fact that just exists out in the vacuum. For instance, in Leviticus, you're supposed to stone a woman to death if she forgets so violating the Sabbath. Part of that could be forgetting how many steps she took. You're supposed to stone these women to death for forgetting how many steps they take on the Sabbath. Believe it or not, I don't think that works today. And that may be one of the sort of silly aspects coming out of Leviticus. There are many, many other aspects that come out of the Bible that just don't apply in today's world. To sum this up, because I already see, wow, I didn't think this was going to be this long. I'm going to tell you, I thought this was going to be a relatively short video, but to sum this up, I did a story. So this was yesterday. I published a Transgender Joy video go and look at my transgender joy videos. I try to do like, it has to be less than 3 minutes, but I try to do like 3 stories that that just bring, this idea that there is love, there is care, there is happiness out there in the world. And anyway, transgender joy, go and watch those. I also see Helena Maya Mouse. Hello, Helena. So I did a story. It was in my, and Rochelle. I love the name Rochelle, by the way. Rochelle Markham. Hello. So I did a story in my transgender joy video. It turns out there were some queer Christians, which just the phrase alone kind of seems weird to me, but queer Christians, there we go, in Madison, Wisconsin. They protested. They protested on the Christian Feast of Holy Innocents, like plural. Not the noun of being innocent, but rather the group of people who are innocent. They protested against using religion to justify violence, which has been done. Every time you go, well, look, it says in the Bible, apparently Moses was some sort of a molecular biologist. It says that God made man and, male and female. Somehow Moses knew enough to say XXXY in Genesis. Pretty impressive. They protest against using religion to justify violence because there's a ton of it. These queer Christians believe in the tradition, but they do not believe in laws that are now thousands of years old, minimum. So the point is that it is not either tradition or innovation. It is both remembering why we did what we did and then always trying to do better given what we learned. I'm pretty much stealing that from Maya Angelou. I know it. But this is also, in short, I introduced myself as a scientist. This is, in short, how the scientific method works. We build on the hypotheses that we develop, but we don't lose sight of the purpose of science, which is to explain the world, which is to make the world better, and always to improve the situation of humans who are served by science, not the other way around. It is both and. So that was all I had for today. There we go. Hopefully that was fun. Maybe not fun, but I do. So I love this idea of taking like really disparate ideas and pulling something common out of it and having people go, I don't know how you got that, but wowzers. I get a crack out of that. Thank you for liking the live, Rochelle. This is Charlotte. I think this is exactly the point. The point was we put it into law so you knew you weren't supposed to ask for things. Stop asking. Rewriting laws is so hard when it's your job. I do appreciate that. You do. I mean, there is a certain truth to that. That you go, well, listen, we don't want to change laws unless it makes sense. And if you look, I'm in the U.S. If you look at how constitutional law works, right? Like it's not easy to make a constitutional amendment. Even amendments that have been ratified, for that matter. Just to go back to the Equal Rights Amendment that I talked about long ago. That is their job. But their job should also be to, the legislative branch, at least here in the U.S., should be, well, how do we make things better for everybody today? Because things are very different from how they were, 200 years ago. Very different. So, and Margie, this is a great point. So Margie says, especially in Peggy versus NHS Fife, the attempted excluded party was a doctor, right? Dr. Beth Upton. Hospitals do, in fact, need doctors. And so that's part of what this particular article brings out, that, an employment tribunal is going to look at this and go, well, I mean, we got to get the job done. Like at some point, we've got to get the job done. And that's what, just to bring this back to the point that I have, like you can come up with things that you believe, right? It's definitely good to remember why we did what we did, but you also have to do better. When you're in a hospital, like you actually need to do the purpose of the hospital. Like that's the point. So, yeah, we need doctors, but apparently no one else needs to be a professional anymore. Well, once again, like I agree. I mean, I came up with a point that you cannot actually rectify this bioessentialist argument with the idea of individual rights. And so, conservatives who say, oh, well, we stand for individual rights, but then they also stand for this bioessentialist argument. There is necessarily a cognitive dissonance, not even a cognitive dissonance. It is a logical fallacy to equate individual rights, that is to say, inalienable rights, with bioessentialism. It just can't happen. So, while this article says, well, employment tribunals have to make sure that the employment is at the very least, effective, I still believe no matter what happens, when you challenge this in a court of law, it will come down to the point where somebody goes, we can't have these two things together. And if you look at the language, especially in Peggy versus Fife, but also the language that came from U.S. versus Scrimeti, what was that, last December, I think? No, when did that? It was last summer. So sorry, last summer when the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a decision on U.S. versus Scrimeti about a law in Tennessee that had to do with preventing transgender youth from getting gender-affirming care, but making sure that cisgender youth could get said gender-affirming care. The language used in it is so squidgy. And they just they're like, you know what, we're going to punt on this particular issue, and just sort of punted it down the road. Which they're going to have to keep doing. Like, we're just going to have to keep on doing this. Finally, at some point, there's going to be some judge some Supreme Court justice who goes, gosh, we've got to make a decision. Like, we've got to strike this down. We've got to go, okay, look, these two things cannot coexist. You cannot have bioessentialist individual rights, period. Anyway, thank you. That was... There's my little rant. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at a name. Guavanana. I'm going to say Guavanana. I'm loving that. I just love saying it. Guavanana. All right, so I got 3:07 here. Usually I try to be done by 3, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a short break. We'll pull up whatever the video game's called, Super Lesbian Animal RPG. Play a little bit of that now that we've actually made the world better here. So thank you, everybody, for helping me make the world a better place. Making the world a safer place for penguins and baby seals. All right, here we go. Taking a break, 5 minutes, and I will be back.